Imagine standing there, looking at someone you love more than anything, someone who has been your anchor your entire life, and suddenly realizing that they've been carrying a secret that could change everything you thought you knew about yourself. That's exactly what happened to me. I want you to picture this. It was a warm evening, the kind of evening where the crickets sing a steady rhythm and the air feels heavy with summer. I stepped outside and saw my mom sitting on the porch swing, tears running down her face, her hands gripping the wooden armrests like she was holding onto the last pieces of herself. And then she looked at me, not just as her child but almost like I was a stranger, and whispered words that sent a shiver down my spine. Asterisk, I can't keep your secret anymore. Asterisk, in that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Now, before I take you deeper into this story, I want you to stay with me because I know exactly why you clicked on this video. You want answers. You want to know what kind of secret a mother could keep about her own child, and what could make her break down on a quiet porch night after holding it in for so long. And let me promise you something, you are going to get the answer for which you came here. But not right away. Because the truth doesn't just reveal itself in one flash. The truth unravels slowly, layer by layer, like peeling back the walls of a house you thought you knew, only to find hidden rooms behind them. And I want you to sit in that space with me because I promise you, by the end of this, you'll understand why that one sentence changed my life forever. I want to talk to you directly, not as some stranger telling a story on the internet, but almost like we're sitting in your living room together. You've had family dinners, right? You've had moments when your mom or dad looked at you with that quiet stare that felt heavier than words. You've probably wondered, just like all of us at some point, what parts of your life you don't know, what things your family might have hidden to protect you. That's what this is about. This is about family secrets, buried memories, and the kind of truth that doesn't just shock you, it shakes you down to your bones. And I want you to really put yourself in my shoes because this story isn't just mine, it could happen to anyone. The atmosphere that night was so heavy it felt like the world itself was waiting for me to react. I could hear the distant hum of cars on the highway, the flickering light of the porch bulb buzzing like it was nervous too, and my mom, my strong, dependable, unshakable mom, was crumbling right in front of me. If you've ever seen a parent cry in a way that made you feel like the roles reversed, like suddenly you had to be the strong one, then you know the kind of heart-pounding fear that ran through me. But her words weren't just about pain. They were about a secret that I didn't even know existed. She said it like she had been carrying the weight of 2 lifetimes, and that night she couldn't bear it anymore. Now, here's where I really need you to listen because this is where the first cracks in everything I thought I knew started to show. My mom had never been dramatic, never one to exaggerate or get emotional without reason. So when she said, "I can't keep your secret anymore," I knew it wasn't just about her, it was about me. And if you've ever had that gut feeling that someone was about to tell you something that could tear your world apart, then you know the exact sensation I had in my chest that night. My heart wasn't just beating, it was pounding so hard I thought it might shatter. What secret could possibly be so heavy that my mom would break down crying on the porch just to let it out? Was it something about my childhood? Something about who I really was? Or was it something darker, something I wasn't ready to face? The questions came crashing down all at once, but the answers, well, those would come slowly, painfully, and only after I was ready to hear them. And I want you to stay with me through this, because this story is one of those rare ones that grips you from the very beginning and doesn't let go until the last word. See, the thing about secrets is that they don't stay buried forever. They claw their way out, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in tears, and sometimes in moments when the world feels too quiet. That night on the porch was just the beginning. My mom's tears, her shaking voice, and that haunting sentence were the spark that lit the fire. What came next? That's the part you won't want to miss. Because what she revealed didn't just make me question her, it made me question myself, my memories, and even the foundation of who I thought I was. And I'll leave you here at the very edge of it, with my mom staring at me through tear-filled eyes, her lips trembling as she prepared to speak again. The night felt endless, the porch swing creaked under her weight, and my whole life hung in the silence between us. When she finally opened her mouth, the words that came out were not what I was expecting at all. That moment on the porch lingered in my head like a shadow that wouldn't go away, but to understand how we got there, I need to take you back a little because the truth never just shows up uninvited, it's built up through years of tiny choices, buried conversations, and details that don't seem important until one day they snap together like puzzle pieces. My life before that night wasn't extraordinary by any means. I worked a steady job, tried to keep up with the everyday grind like anyone else in America, juggling bills, deadlines, and family obligations. I lived close to my mom, we saw each other often, and everything seemed normal, at least on the surface. But if I'm being honest with you, the weeks leading up to that night felt different in ways I couldn't explain. My mom had been more withdrawn, more watchful. She'd stare at me sometimes like she was trying to memorize my face, and when I'd catch her, she'd smile quickly and change the subject. At the time I brushed it off as stress or maybe loneliness, but now, looking back, it was something deeper, like she was measuring the weight of what she was about to tell me. I want you to picture this with me because it might remind you of your own life. You're sitting at dinner with your mom, laughing about some silly family memory, and then suddenly she zones out, staring past you like she's not even in the room. It happened more than once. The night before the porch incident, we were at the kitchen table eating takeout, scrolling through trending videos on YouTube about unsolved mysteries and hidden family secrets. Because, ironically, my mom loved watching those kinds of stories. She'd shake her head and say, "Can you imagine living your whole life and then finding out your parents weren't who they said they were?" At the time I laughed and said, "Yeah, that would mess someone up." But the way she responded, quiet, almost too quiet, made me wonder if she was talking about herself. It was one of those comments that slides right by you in the moment, but then slams into you later when the truth starts to surface. And it wasn't just her behavior that seemed off. My best friend Ryan had noticed it too. Ryan had been around since high school, practically like another son to my mom, and even he pulled me aside one day and said, "Man, is your mom okay?" She looked at me the other night like she didn't even recognize me. At first I thought he was exaggerating, but when I really thought about it, there had been moments where my mom seemed lost, like her mind was somewhere far away. It was unsettling, but I never pressed her on it. I think I was afraid of what she might actually say. And then there was Jenna, my girlfriend. She had her own suspicions. She told me once after dinner at my mom's place, "Your mom seems like she wants to tell you something. She kept watching you when you weren't looking, like she was waiting for the right moment." Jenna was the type who picked up on every detail, things I often missed. And when she said that, I laughed it off, but deep down I knew she was right. It was like everyone around me sensed that something was coming, and I was the only one pretending not to notice. The days kept rolling by, but things around me started to feel more and more strange. I'd get these phone calls in the middle of the night, no one answering on the other end, just static. I thought it was prank calls or maybe a wrong number, but they kept happening, always around the same time, 3 a.m., when the world feels the quietest and your mind is most open to fear. I never told my mom about them, but the strange thing was, whenever I got one of those calls, she seemed to know. The next morning she'd ask, "Did you sleep okay? You didn't look rested." Her intuition was unsettling, like she was tied into things I wasn't even aware of. And here's where it gets even stranger. One afternoon I came home from work and there was a box sitting on the front porch. No name, no return address, just a plain cardboard box. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age, of kids I didn't recognize. Some were from the 80s, some older, and in one of them I swear I saw a boy who looked almost exactly like me, but the photo was dated years before I was even born. That's when I really started to feel like something wasn't right, like my whole identity might not be what I thought it was. I wanted to ask my mom about it, but every time I tried to bring it up, my chest tightened and I couldn't force the words out. And you know what's crazy? Around the same time, people in town started acting differently toward me too. I'd walk into the local diner and the older folks, ones who had known my family for decades, would go quiet when I entered, like my presence shifted the air. A few even gave me these looks, long and knowing, like they were holding back some unspoken truth. It made me wonder if the secret wasn't just between my mom and me, but something the whole town had been silently keeping. Now, I want you to keep this in mind because it's important. Not everything that looks suspicious ends up being the real threat. That's how secrets work. They hide behind decoys, behind red herrings meant to distract you from the truth. Was Ryan really just concerned about my mom, or was he digging for reasons of his own? He had been around since we were teenagers. He knew my family in ways most people didn't. Was Jenna just being observant, or was there more behind her curiosity than she let on? Even the people in town, were they keeping quiet out of respect for my mom, or because they knew something I didn't? All of this built up to that night on the porch. My mom wasn't just crying because of the weight of her own heart. She was crying because the walls around the secret had started to crumble, piece by piece, and she couldn't hold them up anymore. But the thing about tearing down walls is that you don't know what you're going to find behind them. And as I sat there, watching her try to find the courage to speak again, I had no idea whether what she was about to tell me would break me apart or finally set me free. She took a deep breath, her eyes locked on mine, and for a split second, I saw something in her face I had never seen before: fear. Real, undeniable fear. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. The words my mom finally forced out that night didn't give me answers the way I hoped. They only deepened the shadows. She said, almost in a whisper, "You've been living with a secret your whole life, and I thought I could protect you from it forever. but it's finding you now and I can't stop it anymore." My mind reeled as she said those words and I kept waiting for her to explain, but before she could, something happened that still chills me when I think about it. The porch light flickered just once like a warning. And then my mom froze. She glanced out toward the street, her entire body stiffening, like she saw something I didn't. That moment passed quickly, but she changed. Her eyes darted back to me, and instead of continuing, she clammed up again, shaking her head as if she had said too much already. It was like someone, or something, had silenced her before she could finish. The next morning I tried to bring it up again, but my mom was distant, avoiding my questions, pretending nothing had happened. It was infuriating. I wanted to press her, but every time I opened my mouth, her expression made me feel guilty, like I was pushing her toward a cliff she wasn't ready to fall off. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went looking for that box of photographs, the one that had been left on my porch. I had tucked it away in the garage, but when I went to grab it, it was gone. Vanished. I searched every corner, every shelf, even checked the trash, but it wasn't there. My first thought was maybe my mom had found it and thrown it out, but when I asked her about it, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "What box?" Her denial felt rehearsed, almost too polished, like she was waiting for that question and had her answer prepared. That's when I knew I wasn't just up against her silence, I was up against something bigger, something that wanted the truth buried. And it didn't stop there. 2 nights later, as I was leaving work, I found a note wedged under the windshield wiper of my car. No signature, no explanation, just 6 words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I read it over and over, trying to make sense of it, but the message was clear. Someone knew I was asking questions. Someone knew I was getting close. But how? I hadn't told anyone, not even Jenna, about what my mom said on the porch. The only explanation was that someone had been watching, listening, waiting. That warning should have scared me off, but instead it pushed me further. I started digging into old family records, school yearbooks, anything that might connect the dots. That's when I stumbled onto something strange. My birth certificate looked normal at first glance, but when I compared it to other official documents, I noticed tiny differences. The signatures didn't match exactly, the font seemed slightly off, like it had been replaced. I took it to a friend of mine who works in an office downtown, and even he frowned, saying, "This looks like it was reissued, but the file number doesn't match up with state records." It felt like someone had gone back and rewritten part of my life on paper. And then Ryan came back into the picture in a way I wasn't expecting. He called me late one night, his voice low and uneasy, and said, "Listen, I don't know how to say this, but I think your mom's been lying to you for a long time." When I asked him what he meant, he hesitated before admitting, "I overheard her years ago talking to someone on the phone. She said, 'He can never know the truth about that night.' I thought she was talking about your dad's accident, but now I'm not so sure." The way he said it made me wonder if Ryan knew more than he was letting on. He had been close to my family for so long, maybe too close. And for the first time, I wondered if I could even trust him. Was he trying to help me, or was he guiding me toward the version of the truth he wanted me to believe? The more I dug, the more obstacles appeared. A box of evidence vanished. Records didn't line up. Friends who once felt safe suddenly seemed suspicious. Even Jenna began to act differently, protective, almost overbearing, like she didn't want me digging too deep. She said it was because she didn't want to see me hurt, but the way she pressed me to just let it go raised alarms in my head. Why would she care so much about me stopping, unless she had a reason of her own? And just when I thought things couldn't get stranger, I found something hidden in the attic. A letter sealed in an old envelope, addressed to my mom but never opened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but one line on the back stopped me cold. "The child must never know." My hands shook as I held it, and I knew this was it. This was the piece of the puzzle that could blow everything wide open. But before I could even open it, I heard footsteps behind me in the attic. Slow. Careful. Like someone had followed me up there. When I turned around, I wasn't alone. When I spun around in that dusty attic, my pulse hammering in my ears, I expected to see my mom, maybe Jenna, or even Ryan following me up to ask what I was doing. But instead, standing half in the shadows at the top of the stairs was my Aunt Lisa, my mom's younger sister. She looked just as startled as I felt, her hand frozen on the railing, her eyes locked on the letter in my hand. For a moment neither of us said a word, the silence thick enough to suffocate, until finally she broke it with a voice that was barely a whisper. "You weren't supposed to find that." The way she said it wasn't a warning, it was a confession. My mind scrambled to make sense of why she was there, what she knew, and whether she had been part of this secret all along. But before I could ask, she snatched the letter from my hand and shoved it into her jacket pocket. her face pale and tight with fear. She wouldn't explain, only muttering, "It's not safe to talk about this here," before rushing back down the stairs, leaving me with more questions than answers. The tension in the house after that was unbearable. I tried to act normal around my mom, but I couldn't stop wondering why her own sister would sneak into our attic, why she would take the one piece of evidence I'd found, and most importantly, who she was protecting by doing so. The thing about secrets is they always pull in more people than you expect, and soon the circle around me grew wider. A few days later, Ryan called me again, but this time his voice was panicked. He told me that someone had slipped a note under his apartment door with the same jagged handwriting as the warning I'd found on my car. This one said, "He's not who you think he is." Ryan didn't know if the message was meant for him or about me, but either way it rattled him enough to ask, "Man, what the hell is going on? Why are they dragging me into this too?" Hearing that nearly broke me because it meant this wasn't just about my mom and me anymore. Whoever was behind these notes wanted to expand the fear, to make everyone around me question the ground they were standing on. And it was working. I started looking at Ryan differently, second-guessing his motives every time he called. Was he really being targeted too, or was this a clever way to throw me off balance to make me doubt my only ally? It's funny how paranoia seeps into everything once it gets a foothold. You can't look at anyone the same way, not even the people you've trusted your whole life. At the same time, Jenna began to show cracks in ways I hadn't seen before. She was supportive at first, helping me search through old boxes and asking questions I was too nervous to voice, but then something shifted. One night while she was at my place, I caught her going through my desk drawer after she thought I had gone to bed. When I asked her what she was doing, she froze and said she was just looking for a pen. But the way her hand lingered over the drawer, the way her eyes flickered with guilt, told me otherwise. Later that week, she admitted that she had gotten a phone call herself, an unknown number that whispered one single phrase before hanging up. "Don't let him find out." She swore she didn't know what it meant, but I could tell from the tremor in her voice that it shook her to the core. And for me it raised another chilling question. Was the warning about me? The contradictions kept piling up. First, my mom said she couldn't keep my secret anymore, but never explained what secret it was. Then my Aunt Lisa appeared in the attic, clearly involved, but instead of offering clarity, she took the only clue I had and vanished. Ryan, who had always been like a brother, suddenly received the same kind of threatening notes I had, making me wonder if he was victim or conspirator. And Jenna, who I wanted to lean on most, admitted she was being dragged into this too, but in a way that made me suspect she might know more than she was telling me. Each person around me seemed to hold a piece of the truth, but none of the pieces fit together. They contradicted, they overlapped, they erased each other. It all came to a head one evening when I decided to confront my mom again, determined not to let her brush me off this time. I told her everything, about the missing box, about Ryan's note, about Jenna's phone call, and about Aunt Lisa stealing the letter from the attic. My mom's face drained of color as I spoke, and for a moment, I thought she might finally crack and tell me everything. But instead, she did something that terrified me more than any confession could have. She reached for my hand, gripped it so tightly it hurt, and whispered, "You're in danger because of me." Before I could ask what she meant, she shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face, and repeated, "Please stop before it's too late." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a family secret. It was a curse, something that had spilled beyond the walls of our house, infecting everyone I cared about. And just as I was about to press her for more, the phone rang. It was late, close to midnight, and the sound cut through the room like a blade. My mom froze, staring at the receiver as if she already knew who was on the other end. When I picked it up, the line was dead silent for a long beat, and then a distorted voice whispered, "Ask her about the fire." I turned to my mom, her face pale, her body shaking, and in that instant I knew, I hadn't even scratched the surface of the truth. The fire? What fire? The whisper about the fire kept replaying in my mind like a broken record, but I didn't even have time to press my mom for answers before everything around me started unraveling faster than I could keep up. That same week, Ryan stopped answering my calls. At first I thought maybe he was just giving me space, but after 2 days of silence I drove to his apartment and what I found shook me. His front door was slightly ajar, the lights inside still on, but the place was empty. Not just empty of him, but stripped bare in a way that didn't make sense. His phone charger was still plugged into the wall, his shoes by the door, even a half-empty cup of coffee sat on the counter like he had just stepped out. But Ryan was gone. No note, no message, nothing. The police brushed it off when I reported it, saying adults disappear all the time, but I knew Ryan. He wouldn't have left like that. Not without telling me. Not without a reason. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized his disappearance might not be a coincidence at all. It might be a warning. The paranoia set in quickly after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Walking through the grocery store parking lot, I noticed the same black sedan idling across the street, not once but 3 different times that week. Every time I tried to catch a glimpse of the driver, the car would roll away slowly, disappearing into the traffic like it had never been there. On the highway, I caught sight of headlights in my rearview mirror that stayed with me for miles, turning when I turned, slowing when I slowed, until I pulled abruptly into a gas station and the car sped off without stopping. You can call it coincidence, but when your best friend vanishes into thin air and your mother's secrets start swallowing your life, coincidence doesn't feel like an option anymore. It feels like surveillance. My nights turned restless, haunted by questions I couldn't silence. What fire had that voice mentioned? Could it be tied to the family home I barely remembered from childhood, the one my mom always avoided talking about? Was it possible that something had happened before I was old enough to remember, something so dark that my entire identity was built on covering it up? And if that was the case, then why did other people, strangers even, seem invested in keeping me from finding out? My fear wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about survival. Because if Ryan's disappearance was connected to this, it meant anyone who got too close to me was at risk. And Jenna, who was already getting pulled in against her will, might be next. But the real breaking point came one night when I was driving home, exhausted and numb from everything, only to find the front door of my house wide open. I froze in the driveway, my stomach sinking. I knew I had locked it before leaving that morning. I sat there in the car, heart pounding, trying to decide whether to call someone or go inside, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Taped to the door, flapping lightly in the night breeze, was a piece of paper. On it, in the same jagged handwriting as before, were 3 words: "We warned you." I couldn't breathe as I stepped inside, every creak of the floorboard sounding like thunder. The living room was untouched, the kitchen in order, but when I reached my bedroom, I felt my entire world tilt. Every drawer was pulled open, the contents scattered on the floor. My desk was overturned, papers strewn everywhere, as if someone had been searching for something. And in the middle of the mess, sitting on my bed like it had been placed there intentionally, was the letter that Aunt Lisa had taken from me in the attic. The same envelope, the same words on the back. Asterisk, the child must never know. Asterisk, my hands trembled as I reached for it, torn between fear and the desperate need for answers. But before I could tear it open, I heard footsteps outside the window. Slow, deliberate, circling the house. In that moment, it hit me that this wasn't just a puzzle to solve anymore. This was a game of survival. Someone was watching me, someone was close, and someone wanted me to stop digging so badly they were willing to tear apart my life, take my best friend, and leave threats at my door. My mom's tears on the porch, her desperate plea to stop, Aunt Lisa's frantic behavior, it all came rushing back, and I realized they weren't just protecting a secret. They were protecting me from whoever was outside right now. But the question that gnawed at me as I stood frozen in that dark room was the most terrifying of all. Protecting me from what? The footsteps outside circled the house once, then faded into the night, leaving me standing in that torn-apart bedroom, the letter trembling in my hands. I thought that was going to be the moment I finally uncovered the truth, the moment when all the unanswered questions would finally crash into focus. But the letter didn't hold what I expected. Inside wasn't a confession, not a long explanation, but a single black and white photograph. It was old, the edges curled and brittle, but the image was sharp enough to send chills racing through me. It was of a house on fire, flames consuming the roof, smoke billowing into the night sky. And standing in front of it, half lit by the blaze, was a woman clutching a child. At first I thought it was some random piece of evidence from a past tragedy, but when I looked closer at the child's face, I felt my stomach twist. The child looked exactly like me. I rushed to my mom with the photo, my words stumbling over each other as I demanded answers. She stared at it for a long time, her face frozen, before finally whispering, "I was hoping you'd never see this." I pressed her. Was the child me? Was this the fire the voice had mentioned? Was this the secret she'd been carrying? But instead of giving me clarity, her answer cracked the world open even wider. "That's not me in the photo," she said softly, "and that's not you." I didn't understand at first. How could it not be me when the resemblance was undeniable? But the look in her eyes told me she wasn't lying. What she said next made me realize the story I thought I was living wasn't the story at all. She admitted that there was another child, one I had never been told about. I didn't want to believe it, but she insisted. Years before I was born, my mom had lived through something she had never spoken of, a night when a house burned to the ground and with it, lives were lost. She confessed that the child in the photo was connected to us in ways I couldn't yet understand, but she refused to say how. Her hands shook as she tried to explain, and just when she seemed on the edge of blurting it out, the front door slammed open. My Aunt Lisa stormed in, her face flushed with anger, and before I could react, she snatched the photo from my hand. She turned to my mom and said, "If you tell him everything, you'll destroy him. Isn't that what you've been trying to prevent all these years?" That's when the ground really shifted under me. It wasn't just my mom hiding things, it was both of them together actively deciding what I was allowed to know. And if Lisa's words were true, then the secret wasn't just about me being protected. It was about me being shielded from something too terrible to handle. I demanded answers, yelling at both of them, but they stood frozen, exchanging a look I couldn't read. Like they had silently agreed on a script long before I walked into this nightmare. But the real twist didn't come from them. It came hours later, after the tension in the house boiled over and I stormed out into the night, needing air, needing space to think. I drove aimlessly until I ended up at Jenna's place, hoping for some comfort, some grounding. She opened the door, her eyes red as if she'd been crying, and before I could say anything, she blurted out something that nearly knocked me off my feet. "I need to tell you the truth before they do," she said, her voice trembling. "Your mom and Lisa aren't the only ones keeping secrets. I've known about the fire for months." She led me inside, pulled out her phone, and showed me a series of emails she'd been receiving long before this all began. Anonymous messages with photos of the same burning house, messages that hinted at a child who survived, messages that told her to keep me from digging too deep. She had been trying to protect me, or so she claimed, but the betrayal stung worse than the threats. The one person I thought I could trust had been part of this web the entire time. When I demanded to know who had sent her those emails, she looked away, her voice barely audible. "It's someone you know. Someone close." In that instant, the floor seemed to vanish beneath me. Every person I loved, my mom, my aunt, my best friend, my girlfriend, was tangled up in this story, each of them holding their own fragments of the truth. And now the story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about another child who looked like me, a fire that haunted everyone, and the terrifying possibility that the secret I thought was mine alone might actually belong to someone else entirely. The worst part? As I sat there in Jenna's living room, my head spinning from everything she revealed, her phone buzzed with a new message. No subject line, no sender name, just one line in the body of the email that made my blood run cold. "You were never supposed to exist." The words in that email, "you were never supposed to exist," settled into my chest like a stone I couldn't breathe around. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, while Jenna sat across from me, silent, her eyes red and wet but refusing to meet mine. I wanted to scream, to demand why she had hidden these messages from me, but the truth is I was too afraid of what the answers would be. My entire life suddenly felt like it was dangling on a thread that could snap with a single wrong move. And then the ultimatum came, not from my mom, not from Lisa, not even from the shadowy figures leaving notes, but from Jenna herself. She looked at me with a kind of desperate resolve and said, "You need to stop this now. You need to choose between me and this obsession, because if you keep digging, you're going to lose everything. And maybe even your life." The words hit harder than I expected, because she wasn't threatening me, she was begging me. But how do you walk away from something that defines you, even if it's dangerous? I couldn't. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the way her hands trembled, or how her voice cracked when she said she couldn't go through this with me anymore. She had her limits and I was pushing past them. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the memories we'd built, and how quickly it was unraveling because of secrets I never asked for. And for the first time, I realized I might have to choose love and safety on one side, truth and danger on the other. No matter what I chose, I was going to lose something I couldn't get back. But before I could answer her, the situation forced me into another impossible corner. I came home that night to find my mom waiting in the living room, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands clutching a folded piece of paper like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She handed it to me without a word, and on it were two addresses. One was my own house, scribbled in her familiar handwriting. The other was a location I didn't recognize, out on the edge of town where the roads turned to dirt and trees swallowed the sky. "If you go there," she said in a voice that cracked like glass, "you'll find the answers you're looking for. But once you do, you can't come back here. You'll have to live with what you find. And I'm telling you now, you won't like it." It was an ultimatum of a different kind. My mom wasn't threatening me, she was warning me. But the meaning was clear. Choosing that second address meant choosing the truth over her, choosing to walk away from the family I had always known. My heart split in two because no matter which road I took, I was betraying someone. If I stayed, I'd betray myself and the gnawing need to know who I really was. If I left, I'd betray her, the woman who had raised me, sacrificed for me, and who was still, despite all the lies, my mom. The weight of it crushed me. I sat there staring at the paper, feeling like I was watching my own life being torn apart in slow motion. And the worst part was that I wasn't even sure the choice mattered because it felt like the walls were closing in no matter what. Ryan was gone, Jenna was slipping away, Lisa was hiding more than she revealed, and my mom was begging me to stop. But I couldn't stop, not anymore. It was too late. The truth wasn't just calling, it was hunting me down. I told myself I'd sleep on it, that maybe clarity would come with morning, but the universe had other plans. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A blocked number. I answered, and the voice on the other end was calm, steady, and far too familiar. "If you go to that address," it said, "you'll end up like Ryan." My breath caught in my throat as the line went dead. I replayed the voice over and over in my head, and the realization hit me like a knife in the gut. I knew who it belonged to. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some faceless enemy. It was someone close. I lay there in the darkness, my heart pounding, torn between rage and fear. Whoever was behind this, whoever had been circling me with threats and warnings, wasn't just outside my circle of trust. They were inside it. Someone I loved had been pulling strings all along, and now I had to face the most terrifying question of all. If the enemy was already in my life, how could I ever know who to trust again? The voice on the phone was like a thunderclap in my skull, familiar enough to set every nerve on fire but slippery enough that I couldn't pin it down. I barely slept after that, my mind clawing at itself, replaying every conversation, every suspicious glance, every too perfect reassurance from the people in my life. By the time the sun came up, I felt like I had aged years in one night. That was when I made the choice I had been avoiding. I drove to the second address on the paper my mom had given me. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, as though the entire world was holding its breath. It wasn't just some abandoned shack in the woods like I had imagined. It was an old community center, boarded up, its windows covered in grime, but still standing tall like a relic of another time. And when I pulled up, my heart stopped. There were already cars parked outside. Not one, not two, but four lined up like soldiers in a row. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Whoever was inside, they weren't strangers. I could feel it. Against every screaming instinct in my body, I forced myself to go in. The door creaked open into a large hall where dust hung in the air like fog, and in the center, gathered around a long wooden table, were the people I least expected to see together. My mom, Aunt Lisa, Jenna. And standing at the far end, looking as though he had never disappeared at all, was Ryan. The sight of him nearly dropped me to my knees. He wasn't missing. He hadn't been taken. He was right there, alive, calm, almost smug. And that was when I knew the betrayal wasn't on its way. It had already happened. My mom looked at me with tears in her eyes, her face etched with guilt, but Ryan spoke first, his voice carrying the same measured tone I had heard on the phone the night before. "You should have stopped when we told you," he said, not a trace of apology in his voice. "We tried to protect you, but you wouldn't listen." The room spun as I tried to process what I was seeing. The people I loved most weren't just keeping secrets. They were part of something together, something vast enough to make them lie, threaten, and even orchestrate disappearances. Jenna couldn't meet my eyes. Lisa stood stiffly, arms crossed, as if guarding herself from me. And my mom looked broken, but she didn't deny any of it. That silence cut deeper than Ryan's betrayal. It meant everything I thought I knew about my life had been orchestrated. Ryan continued, his words slicing through the air like knives. "This isn't about you anymore. It never was. You're just the byproduct of something bigger, something that started before you were even born." He gestured toward the photo of the burning house, now spread out on the table in plain view. "That fire wasn't an accident. It was the night everything changed, and your entire life has been built on keeping what really happened buried." He leaned closer, his eyes cold. "And you were never supposed to find out." I wanted to scream, to demand the truth in full, but my body felt like it was locked in place. My mom finally found her voice, but it wasn't the comfort I needed. "You don't understand," she whispered, shaking her head. "If we tell you everything, they'll come for you just like they came for the others. This is bigger than us, bigger than this family. It's an entire network, and once you're inside it, you can't get out." The words made my blood run cold. A network. Not just a family secret, not just a small-town mystery. A conspiracy stretching beyond the walls of that room, big enough to erase people, big enough to rewrite birth records, big enough to make an entire town complicit. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't coincidence. It was real. And it meant that everyone I had trusted had been living a double life, protecting me on one hand and deceiving me on the other. Jenna finally spoke then, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to lie to you. I tried to warn you in my own way, but they told me if I pushed too far I'd end up like—" She cut herself off, biting her lip, but I knew the name she wasn't saying. Ryan had never been missing. Which meant the person who had vanished without a trace wasn't him. It was someone else. Someone they had erased to keep this secret alive. The realization made me feel sick. If they had the power to make someone disappear completely, to remove them from the world without explanation, then what chance did I have? And yet, standing there, surrounded by the very people I loved most, I knew I couldn't turn back. Because if I did, I'd never know who I truly was, or why my existence was treated like a mistake. Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and commanding now. "You have two choices. Walk away and never ask another question, or stay and accept the consequences. But if you choose to stay, you'll have to give up everything you thought you knew about yourself, and maybe everyone you care about. There's no middle ground anymore." The ultimatum hit me like a brick wall. Safety or truth? Life as I knew it, or life as it really was? And for the first time, I realized there might not be a right choice at all. Only survival. But that wasn't the final blow. No, the real twist came when my mom, tears streaming, finally broke her silence. "He's not just a survivor," she whispered, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "He was the reason for the fire." The room went silent. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding like a war drum. I wanted to scream that it wasn't possible, that I was just a child, that I couldn't have caused something so devastating. But the way they all looked at me, haunted, broken, afraid, made me realize they believed it. Maybe it wasn't deliberate, maybe it wasn't even my fault, but something about me, about who I was, had sparked the tragedy that consumed our past. The room felt like it was closing in on me, every breath heavy with the weight of betrayal, every second another crack in the foundation of the life I thought I had. My mom stood trembling, Aunt Lisa blocking the door, Jenna clutching her hands together like she was praying for me to make the right choice, and Ryan, smug, steady, unwavering, looming over the table like a judge delivering a final sentence. He kept saying I wasn't supposed to exist, that I was the byproduct of a fire, of a conspiracy that had roots deeper than I could imagine. But there was something in his eyes that told me he was leaving something out, some final piece of the puzzle he thought I'd never have the courage to find. That was the moment I realized the climax of this nightmare wasn't about what they wanted to tell me, it was about what I forced myself to see. I lunged for the table, my hands landing on the photograph of the burning house, and I demanded the truth. My mom begged me not to look, her voice cracking as if each word was tearing her apart, but I couldn't stop myself. I flipped the photo over, and for the first time I noticed what none of them had told me. Scrawled on the back in faded ink were names. 3 names. One was my mom's, one was Lisa's, and the third was mine. Only it wasn't my name as I knew it. It was another name entirely. My real name. I staggered back, my knees nearly giving out as the realization hit me like a flood. I wasn't who I thought I was. The identity I'd been living with all my life wasn't mine at all. It was borrowed, given, stolen from someone else. Ryan's voice cut through my panic, sharp and cruel. "Now you understand why you were never supposed to find out. You're not their son, you're the fire's survivor. The child they saved that night, the one they swore to protect even if it meant building an entire lie around you." My vision blurred as the truth settled in. The house fire wasn't just a family tragedy, it was my origin. The child in the photograph wasn't some stranger who looked like me. It was me. I had lived through that inferno, and everything since then, my name, my family, my life, had been a carefully constructed illusion to keep me from remembering. The confrontation spiraled into chaos. Lisa tried to pull me toward the door, urging me to run before they came, whoever that shadowy network truly was. Ryan blocked the way, declaring that if I walked out now, I would bring the fire down on everyone again. Jenna sobbed, begging me to choose her, to leave this behind, to pretend none of it ever happened. And my mom fell to her knees, torn between love and fear, pleading with me to forgive her for hiding everything, while still warning me that knowing the truth would destroy me. It wasn't fists or guns that decided the climax, it was choice. A psychological war where every option felt like damnation. I stood there, shaking, torn in 1,000 directions, until the sound of engines outside shattered the standoff. Headlights swept through the boarded windows and Ryan's confident mask finally cracked. He muttered, "They're here," and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Whoever this network was, whoever they had been hiding me from all these years, they had finally come to claim me. The room erupted into panic. Lisa shoved me toward the back door, Jenna screamed my name, Ryan reached for me like he had authority over my very existence, and my mom wrapped her arms around me as if she could shield me from the inevitable. And in that final chaotic moment, as the front door burst open and dark silhouettes filled the hall, I understood the cruelest truth of all. The people I loved hadn't just been lying to me to protect themselves. They had been lying because they knew I wasn't meant to live this life at all. And just as the figures stormed the room, just as the air filled with shouts and fear, Ryan turned to me with a look that made my blood freeze. "They don't want all of us," he said. "They only want you." The world after that night never looked the same again. When the doors to that old community center burst open and faceless figures poured in, I thought it was the end. The end of my life as I knew it, the end of the fragile story my family had built around me, the end of the lies and the end of the truth all at once. But what I didn't expect was the way my mom moved in front of me, shielding me with her body like she had done since I was a child. It didn't matter that I wasn't her flesh and blood, that my entire identity had been a secret she carried like a wound. She was still my mother in every way that mattered. Lisa followed, shouting at me to run, her voice breaking in a way that told me she had been carrying the weight of this secret just as long. Even Jenna, caught between fear and betrayal, grabbed my hand like she had decided that whatever happened, she would face it with me. And Ryan didn't fight for me. He fought for them. He faced the figures at the door with the calm of someone who had been part of this network all along, who had made his choice long before I walked into that room. It was then I realized that his disappearance, his threats, all of it had been orchestrated to corner me, to force me to accept a fate I had never asked for. What happened after is hard to explain, maybe because I don't remember all of it clearly. There was shouting, scuffling, the crash of furniture, the sting of smoke in the air, the sound of tires outside as more cars pulled up. But what I remember most was the silence after, the way the night seemed to swallow everything whole. When I finally stumbled out of that building, the photograph of the fire still clutched in my hand, the cars were gone. The figures were gone. And so were Ryan, Lisa, and Jenna. Only my mom remained, standing by the door with tears streaming down her face, whispering over and over, "I tried to protect you." In that moment, I understood the real meaning of her words on the porch the night this all began. She hadn't been afraid of me keeping a secret. She had been afraid of what the secret would do to me once it came out. In the days that followed, the story unraveled piece by piece, not in grand revelations but in quiet moments of honesty. The fire had been real. I had been in that house. My biological parents had died that night, consumed by a tragedy that was never fully explained, at least not in ways that made sense. Some said it was an accident, others whispered it was deliberate, an attempt to erase something that should never have existed. My mom and Lisa had found me in the chaos, had carried me out, and from that night on, they had sworn to protect me. They changed my name, buried the records, and built a life for me on top of the ashes of another. It was never supposed to come to light. The network, the people who showed up that night, wanted me gone because in my survival was proof of something they had worked for years to erase. The fire wasn't just destruction. It was cover-up. And I was living evidence that the story wasn't over. Even now, after everything, I don't know the full truth. I don't know exactly why they wanted me gone, why Ryan sided with them, why Jenna kept her silence as long as she did, or why my existence was treated like a mistake. Maybe those answers are lost forever in the flames that nearly consumed me as a child. But I do know this. My life isn't the lie they tried to convince me it was. My existence isn't an accident, even if it wasn't planned. And while the people I loved most betrayed me in ways I may never forgive, they also loved me enough to shield me from a darkness I can only begin to understand. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the echoes of that distorted voice on the phone, telling me to ask about the fire. I see Ryan's face in my dreams, calm and certain as he told me I was never supposed to exist. And I think about Jenna's tears, Lisa's warnings, my mom's sobs on the porch. But more than anything, I think about the choice I made in that room, to stand my ground, to face the truth even if it shattered me, to hold on to the photograph even when it burned my hands with the weight of its meaning. I carry it with me now, tucked into my wallet, not because I want to remember the pain, but because it's the only proof I have that my story didn't end in fire. And yet, the mystery lingers like smoke that never clears. Some nights when I'm driving home, I still see the black sedan in my rearview mirror, headlights steady, following me just long enough to remind me that I'll never be fully free. Some mornings I wake to an email from an anonymous sender, always the same message typed in bold letters. "We're still watching." And every time I read it, I wonder if this story is truly over, or if the fire that birthed me is only waiting for another spark to ignite. So when people ask me now if I've found peace, if I finally know who I am, I tell them the truth. I'm not the child they wanted erased. I am not the lie they tried to build. I am the survivor, the one who was never supposed to exist, still standing, still breathing, still searching. And maybe that's what terrifies them most. Not the fire, not the secret, but the fact that I lived. And as long as I live, their story isn't finished.